This is the last one. This is number 6, obviously, of the 6. Tonight's specific lecture, I mean, this is, as you know, this is called the Theological Bubble. I think you understand now why I called it Shabtai, Tzvi, Messianism and its Discontents. Tonight's lecture is very problematic for me. And the reason is because when I first set this up, I figured you do Shabtai Tzvi, a little bit about intro, a little bit about Shabtai Tzvi, a little bit about the aftermath, Gamarnu. But once I start writing it up, it took me a long time to do the first 2. And Shabtai Tzvi took 3 and not 2, as you saw last week. And there is no way, Jose, that we can do Sabbatianism in a lecture. That's like saying, give me the story of America in 10 minutes. You understand? At least, let's put it this way, I can't right, do any justice to it. And although I never sat down to think about it, without trying to be funny, this is a whole lecture, a series by itself. It would take 5 or 6 talks to do justice to Sabbatianism as a phenomenon. But I do want to stick to the framework, more or less, that I set out for myself. That's what happens when you put out stuff and take it seriously. And so what I'm going to do tonight is something very, what I regard, at least by my standards, very imperfect. Is I'm going to touch on the subject, give a little scratch at a feel, and deal with 1 or 2 stories of many, because that's all I have the time for. You're not going to sit here for 2-3 hours. And leave it at that, and perhaps sometime in the future, find some other framework to flesh it out if I do. So you're going to see what I mean as I pursue it tonight. But just to touch in a very superficial way on 1 or 2 of the crazy stories of the era of Sabbatianism will take a whole talk by itself. So without apologia, I proceed. And I start by saying, up to the death of Shabtai Tzvi, what did the word Sabbatianism mean? It's about Shabtai Tzvi being the Mashiach ben David. He was alive. Mashiach ben David, mamish. Correct? No, I mean it. They thought, if you were Sabbatian prior to 1666, or possibly even afterwards, if you persuaded yourself he's coming back in some form, even though he converted temporarily as a Muslim or some kind of shtick like that, so it had to do with the belief that a particular individual is the Messiah. But then he died. And eventually, not too long afterwards, his son died. And he didn't come back. Not in 40 days, or 40 weeks, or 40 months, or 40 years. Even though there were people who said, in 40 days, he's coming out of the grave, like someone else we know, right? In 40 weeks, 40 months, there was a whole big movement, as I told you before, in 1706. A great deal of Sabbatian activity takes place in the early part of the 18th century. And if you know European history at all, huge world wars are raging at that time. All of Europe was caught up in these gigantic struggles called the War of the Spanish Succession, and at the same time something called the Great Northern War. So without going through the details, it was a go-go-muggo type situation, or at least it could be construed as that. But Shabtai Tzvi didn't show up. What happened in the year of 1706? Nothing. The Battle of Turin, if that means anything. You know? Didn't do anything. And so you'd think that the air went out of the balloon. And yet Sabbatianism, Shabta'ut as we call it, Sabbatianism, survived for 100 years. Many Jews in different places related over the course of the 1700s positively and not negatively to the figure of Shabtai Tzvi. That's an uncomfortable fact. Just get over it. I mean, great Rosh Yeshivas and fools, men and women, boys and girls, smart and dumb, rich and poor, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, and Yemenites and I don't know, Karaites, whatever. I mean, all over the place. So this is weird. Now, I didn't say the majority, because the more time went on, the more that number was small. It still was a substantial number. This trend, which was not an organized movement, so when we call Sabbatianism, it's not like there's Sabbatian headquarters and you send in $5 and you're a card-carrying member, right? There's not an allegiance to a particular big cheese. There are different groups. It marks the first breach in Jewish religious consensus since the time of the Bayesheni, in my opinion. You know, I've talked about this many times. The 4 pillars that identify a consensus. How did Jews survive after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, now we're in just for Tisha B'Av, after the Sanhedrin was destroyed, after the period of what they call Sof Hora, that nobody could even make new laws. How could you survive? There was no state framework. There was no religious framework, no churches, they say, no geographical connectedness or continuity, contiguity. There wasn't even any communication between most Jewish communities. Go back, for example, to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1200s. Most Jewish communities didn't have anything to do with each other, and yet everybody stayed more or less on the same page. Because of this consensus, they all agreed roughly on fundamentalism, nominalism, and the other things that you see up there. And that means that for all those centuries, balancing what I like to call the centrifugal forces that would be pulling Jewish communities away, these commonalities acted as centripetal forces that held everybody together, even though by definition it had to be loose. So one person's definition of fundamentalism was not exactly the same as another person's. It's a big deal. So say you have the Rambam and the Raavad, big deal. But nevertheless, they all believe God created the world, gave the Torah to Moshe, and end up in the Gemara. How, the details, but doesn't matter. You see? And now, in the 1600s and afterwards, because of what we described, all of a sudden this is breached, and this is a thing I want to come back to later on. This is the beginning of the modern era in an important sense in Jewish history, because our great tragedy for the last couple hundred years is we all have an irreparable breach in Judaism. It's the one unsolvable problem, and it's killing us. We don't like to talk about it, but it's killing us. And really, Humpty Dumpty cannot be put back together. At least I don't know how. How are you going to get this group? They just radically disagree on fundamentals. And so you can't get them back together, so it disintegrates. This goes back to the Sabbatianism. It's a harbinger of the fractionation that characterizes Jewish history in the modern era. This is why it was written a great deal and almost celebrated by the famous controversial historian Gershon Shalom from the Hebrew University, who was a big secularist, and he liked everything I just told you. He thought was good. Okay, that you don't like a monolithic Judaism, and it's all kind of different groups, and it's broken apart, and everybody does their own thing, and so forth. Today, looking at the figures and seeing that American Jewry, for example, is disintegrated as we speak, I don't think most people looked at it as such a great idea, but that's their perspective. And he traces it back to Sabbatianism, and he's kind of right. Sabbatianism, then, was a trend of thought and act by Jews that lasted from 1666 to 1801. So it's a little over about 150 years, more or less, 140 years. More accurately, it's a term that covers a set of trends which are not identical at all, but can be classified by their frum opponents under the name Shabtai Tzviism. They did not all involve the belief that Shabtai Tzvi was the Mashiach, but most of them did. Okay? Most of them did. And so, it's like a term, like autism or something like that, which is a term used for a lot of different things. So Sabbatianism, if you lived at that time, if somebody was this way or this way, the frum Jews said there's a bunch of Shabtai Tzvi things. And there's some tenuous connection between them. But they're very, very different. And actually, Sabbatianism is not an accurate term. But this is the term that came to be used. What does it mean? No, as I just said, it didn't mean the same thing ever. So what does the term mean? Well, since there are a lot of different groups, different things, different people. There are a couple of weirdos. Shabtai Tzvi was God. We've had that nowadays also in some places. Or reincarnated. Or secretly alive. But most people didn't think in such terms. So what does the term mean? Well, for one thing, and I'm going to be concentrating on this tonight to some degree, it means theosophy. It's not a term we use too often. In other words, define the term God. Really. Define the term, and not just in a dumb, simple way. And creation and heaven and hell and things like that, but mostly God, which is not something that frum Jews usually get into. There are thinkers, Rambam, Sadigo, and people like that talk about what God, or more exactly what God is not. Ein lo demus haguv, ain't no gu, right? Talk about what God isn't. Poets, going back to Ibn Gavirol and so forth. But what is God? And more importantly, how really did he create the world? And really what they're interested in is, literally, if the world came from nothing, where did nothing come from? The ayin. Because as I said before, if God has defined that which made literally everything, then even the absence of anything is something that's created, if you can hold cup on that. And so these are called theosophy. You're trying to understand the Godhead, the nature of it. You know, what's the meaning of the spheros, if you're Kabbalistic? Are they God? Are they things God created? Are they manifestations of God? So again, these are typical things you're not going to find in a yeshiva classroom, in a Beis Yaakov classroom, or things of this nature, because, well, you know, who knows? They were, once upon a time, people cared a lot about that. And when we talk about Sabbatianism, in the period that it raged, a very interesting section of it, a very important section, dealt with questions of theosophy, which to the public had no idea what they're talking about, but to the frum, intellectuals, they say, oh, you think God is this? That's an avodah zarah. Really, God is that, or we don't know what God is. You see? It's a very subtle, almost hair-splitting differences, but inquiring minds want to know, and people really care about it. So this is what people mean when we talk about Sabbatian theology. All kinds of ideas emerge, all kinds of ideas from different people, not coordinated. Some of them were blatantly treif, and some, not really. Let me put it this way. There are certain ideas that emerged from Sabbatian writers in the 1600s, 1700s that later on find their way, if you know how to look for it, and that find their way in quote-unquote normative Jewish thinkers. Okay? Now, the frum world organically divided the Sabbatians into two types. There were those, well, let me put it this way. The frum world reacted to it in two ways. The frum world can be identified as being composed of two elements in terms of how they related to Sabbatianism. There are those who regard any idea emerging from Sabbatian sources as totally treif. Afil be'elef lo batal, as they say. You find a sefer and has even one line that's treif, burn it, throw it out, get it out. It's like a little bit of cancer, right? It'll spread and contaminate the rest of it, and anything that contains anything heretical whatsoever, out the window. And the next person, for example, who we'll deal with tonight is an example of what I just said. The Tzvi, the famous rabbi of the early 1700s, who's a sworn enemy of all this stuff, and his son is after him, Yaakov Emden. Okay? Anything that touches on this, forget it. No such thing as a little bit of a communist. You understand? He's a communist, he's a communist. On the other hand, there was another second type of frum Jew, a rabbi, a thinker, or a Baal Bayis, who had a more open attitude. And you just got to get over this. Such a person was interested in theosophy, in increasing his personal ruchnias, and was willing and even eager to go fishing and selectively appropriate from Sabbatian writers and writings in recondite matters such as tzimtzum, the meaning of the spheros, and other matters like that. They talk a lot about what does it mean that God created room for nothingness to be, before anything else could be. They call it tzimtzum. Is it literal? Is it not literal? Again, these are things that most of us, it's not even part of our lives, because orthodoxy in our time has sort of morphed into a very practice-oriented religion. It's about doing things. Maybe too much, maybe not enough, but that's what it is. You define somebody today from Jew by the rituals that they perform. Not through the Theosophic hashkafas. Most people don't even know about that. Sabbatianism did attract weirdos, no question about it, but it also attracted many who were learned and eloquent. Sometimes Sabbatianism was a BT thing, a Baal Tshuva thing. If you go back to 1600s, which is what we're talking about, Shabtai Tzvi, Spinoza is a contemporary of Shabtai Tzvi, right? Spinoza is a contemporary of Shabtai Tzvi. He's a Marano. In other words, his parents were born in Portugal. He was born in Holland, but his parents escaped the Inquisition. He's part of that community. Issues such as I just described are bothering him and poking his mind. In his particular case, although he dabbles in Kabbalah, he's primarily going to go in a different direction, let's say a left-wing direction, as emerged in European and Western philosophy, and will eventually emerge as, what should I say, modern secularist, first modern secular Jew, atheist if you want. Of course, he would say it's not atheism, but something along those lines. And simply because these are the conclusions he reaches after he starts speculating about what interests him, including these questions that I just raised. So why does he do that? Everybody knows Spinoza, as I say, came from a totally Baal Tshuva background in the sense that everybody in Amsterdam, without exception, was a Baal Tshuva. They all got off the boat, they were their parents. They all were born Catholic. They all ran away from Spain and Portugal. They're the lucky ones who got in 5 minutes ahead of the Inquisition, unlike their friends and relatives who didn't and got burned. We all know these stories. And so what was the result? You found people who come out of the closet, say they're Jewish, go to Amsterdam, for example, which is a free country, or London or Hamburg or a place like that, Bordeaux, Venice, Livorno. And now they can, as I say before, practice Judaism. And when they encounter Judaism, it's not what they imagined. For example, they walk into a synagogue and see everybody with these weird black boxes in their hands. Like, what the heck is that, right? Let alone 1,000 other dinim, milchik and fleshik, Pesach dishes, cleaning for Pesach. You know, it's not what they imagined. And at the philosophical level, they read or they hear stories from the Talmud or from other places like that, and it like bothers them. You know, this is our religion. And so Spinoza comes from this background. Re-entry into Judaism has never been a totally easy thing for most people. In his case, it become very problematic. And the reason I'm spending time with him is he's a typical example of what I'm talking about a thinking person and a Spanish Jew, Spanish-Portuguese Jew, thinking person who isn't just simply ready to say, all right, just tell me what to do. Where do I put my phone? What time are services? And you know, do we put on the tennis shoes before Marav or after Marav? What do we make for Abdullah this week? Now, I want to tell you something. Most of the Moranos weren't like that. Most of the Moranos did exactly what I just said. There was a guy, Rabbi de Castro, and others who wrote books, and he said, listen, we're coming from the darkness into light. Mafela la'ora. We have to follow what the others are doing. For us, it's weird because Judaism is something that was hidden from us for all these years, and therefore, we're going to just, you know, be Mary had a little lamb. We're going to do it, and we're going to follow the laws. But other people don't want to be like that. Now, the reason I mention that is Spinoza represents somebody who reacts to the impact of these questions of thought in his time, beginning of the early modern period, 17th century, by going into the left into Western philosophy and being a trailblazer in Western philosophy. Others, although they also have philosophical education, will go into Kabbalah. It's a different way of dealing with reality. And the most famous of these, among the Sabbatians, early Sabbatians, is Cardozo, Abraham Miguel Cardozo. Now, here is a remarkable story because these two brothers in Spain, they're Jewish by background, but they're Catholic. Those who were with me in the Verona when we went to Italy, we talked about this. And the guy, and both brothers went to medical school, by the way. It's an old Jewish trait. They went to the University of Salamanca, which in Spain and was the foremost university. And one brother took the medical stuff real seriously. The other one was more of a loyitzlach. You know, he spent time. He writes. He said, "That's the Kabbalist." Right? Spent more time partying and dating. So the one who took medical school more seriously became an eminent physician. Became the doctor of the King of Spain. That's a high position. He became the physician to this guy, to the King of Spain, King Philip IV. And he, let's put it this way, if one of your clients is the King of Spain, who are your other clients? The answer is ka-ching. Right? You're doing pretty well in your practice, okay? Seriously. And yet, secretly, he was Jewish. And he yearned to come out of the closet. And he knew very well, as long as he stays in Madrid, any slight move could get him in big trouble. And how do you live with that tension? But how do you walk away from a 10-figure practice, as we would say today? But he does. He does. One day, he goes for vacation, never comes back. Gets on a boat, goes to Italy, ends up in Venice. And from Venice, he ends up in Verona, the Jewish ghetto of Verona. Verona is a beautiful city, if you've been there, all the way up in the north of Italy. Ends in the ghetto of Verona, where he stays the rest of his life. And so he gave up a 10-figure practice for a peewee practice, right? I mean, what kind of a practice is in the ghetto of Verona? I think the whole community is less than 1,000 people, Jews. But he was happy to do it because he made a trade. And he was Fernando Cardozo. The reason you see this book is because after he runs away to Italy, he publishes a book called The Excellencies of the Jews. Las Excellencias de los Hebreos. Because the Spanish Catholics wrote a book, Las Excellencias de los Españoles. The Excellencies, in other words, just look at me, I'm Spanish. Everybody can tell we're the master race. And anyway, we're tall, dark, and handsome. We're this, we're that, and the other. And Jews, on the other hand, are short, fat, and ugly. They smell. They have Aristotle. They have a certain smell. They have horns. They have this, that, and the other. And he writes a whole book to counter that and defend it. Although he does admit that Jews do have a nervous twitch like this. But no. He says, you live with the Inquisition behind your back. Get it? In fact, he calls it in Latin the Jewish illness. I forget, the mor Judaico or something like that, Malia Judaico. Because, I mean, Chas v'chalil, imagine somebody. There are people here who went through the Holocaust. You know what I'm talking about. Somebody be there without a twitch, I think, is weird. Now his brother. So that's a career. And for those of you interested, the Professor Yerushalmi did his dissertation on this. He wrote a famous book, From Spanish Court to Italian Ghetto. I don't know if I ever mentioned this here before. I got to tell you a story that reminds me. In his book of memoirs, he writes about the fact that he was a physician of King of Spain. King of Spain had a birthday, the 30th birthday, the 40th birthday. Where do you get somebody who has everything? Where do you get somebody who has everything? But the courtiers want to get him something. They want to make a party. Party you have every 10 minutes. You want a party. So he gets bullfight. Bullfight is every 15 minutes in Spain. Not going to have a bullfight. We'll let the whole darn zoo into the thing. That's a good one, right? Let in the bull and the lion and the tiger and the bear and the this and the that. You understand? The alligator and so on and so forth. And you see them all destroy each other. And the Spanish have this bloodline. They think it's great. And of all the animals, after they finish killing each other, this is a true story. Who was left? The answer is the bull. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that's interesting. The bull. And then the king was given a golden musket. A golden musket. And he literally shot the bull. And then he's like this. That was a party, guys. So, Los Excellencias de los Españoles. This is what makes them the master race. His brother had a different. Wait a minute. His brother also ran over to Spain. Also went to Italy. Unlike this brother, he wasn't satisfied with his level of Jewish knowledge, and he wasn't like the other brother who said like this. Listen, it's a journey of exploration. I'm coming in middle life. I'll never be a Talmid Chacham. I know everything I know. I regard as precious, and I'm happy to serve as a physician in a ghetto. I mean, just consider, here you are, a poor Jewish nook in Verona. You have high-end medical knowledge of that time. This is interesting. The other brother went to yeshiva, and then he went to study Kabbalah. Became very learned, but he also ended up, among other things, studying. He went to this yeshiva, went to that yeshiva. One of the yeshivas he went to was Nathan of Gaza. Okay? Because that's the right years, the 1660s. And next thing you know, he is an enthusiastic Sabbatian, but he's a Talmid Chacham in the sense that he learned up a lot. He's obviously a bright guy. Both of these brothers are bright, the way I'm describing them, correct? They're both bright. He ended up immersing himself in Kabbalah, but there's Kabbalah, and then there's Kabbalah. And he ends up in this sort of thing. But then Shabtai dies, and eventually Nathan dies. And this guy is really moved by theosophical questions, as I said before, of which there's nothing really wrong. And he actually spent his entire life, I believe, what shall I say, wrestling with the following interesting question. Who do you daven to? When you daven in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, who do you daven to? Who do you pray to? He said, God. What does that mean? After all, in the ultimate sense, as the Kabbalah puts it, Ein Sof, the highest understanding of God, is absolutely unknowable, unchangeable, beyond any kind of comprehension. So I can't talk to something that... And yet the Siddur says, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Slach lo navini k'latanu r'fa'inu. What am I talking to? Am I talking to the wall? I'm addressing... It's an interesting question, right? So it's funny. In a certain sense, if you think it through, and I'm only going to begin this discussion because that'll take a... He said, certain things, when you pray to an idol, don't you? You pray to your idea of what God is, which is not identical with what God is, which is kind of strange. So these kind of issues, which now that I said it, you'll say, I guess, that's interesting, what's for breakfast, People like him really wrapped up in this. So he wasn't antinomian, he didn't violate the mitzvahs. He was rather anti-Christian, having taken theology courses in the University of Salamanca, so he knew about that. Thank you very much. He desperately wants to know who he's davening to. I don't mean this to be funny. It's a perfectly valid question for a Baal Tshuva to ask. I mean, I don't mean it to be funny at all, right? It's a perfectly valid question. He did believe Shabtai was the Mashiach, and he didn't back off even when Shabtai converted, although he said it's only for the Messiah to convert. Nobody else is allowed to convert. So he's shunned and expelled by all the Jewish communities after the Shabtai episode. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on and so forth, he ends up moving from community to community, writing these tracts. Being a Sabbatian, he lies all base that this was written by so-and-so, he really wrote it, but none of that matters. In the larger sense, he's a person who gets traction, gets a following. And the reason I'm going through all this is not a guy who had secret parties in his bedroom. This is not somebody who did weird things like some of these Sabbatians later on, and give him it. He's asking a perfectly valid question, and so I'll tell you the honest truth. Some of the things he said make sense to me, which goes to show you that I'm not a theosopher. Get it? And so he's left to dream. He has dreams, by the way. He has dreams in which Shabtai appears to him, Eliyahu appears to him. He had a question about bread that was kneaded with wine, something about the bracha, and in his dream, how's it go now? Ben Vinisti, the Knesset Agdol, the rabbi, was in Smyrna, appears to him in a dream and says one thing, but then he says, are you sure? And then the Rambam comes and says something else, and they're having a discussion, and I don't forget who solves the question. He's a strange individual, but he's not insane, right? Certainly not clinically, and he's not, off the wall, but he's preoccupied with issues that have one big problem, and that is he's committed to the idea that Shabtai Tzvi is like some major element in all this. And he wasn't. It's impossible in a single lecture, as I said before, to do justice to this topic, especially the remaining lecture. So tonight I'm going to have to choose out of many Sabbatian stories, one or two, which will give a little bit of an idea of the problems caused by the phenomenon in the 1700s, which was a crazy century. And as I said before, before most of you came in, Sabbatianism, I see now, sitting down regularly, requires its own summer course. The first tale, and one of the more famous ones, involves a person named Nehemiah Hayon, who was years of 1655 to 1730. Years matter. So this is a person, he was 11 years old when the Sabbatian episode ends up, and more importantly, he's 21 when Shabtai dies. Give you an idea. He's 26 when Nathan dies. It's important to put these things in the framework. He's a Sephardi, and very interestingly, he's a Sephardi from the very famous and very important, eminent Sephardic Jewish Torah and cultural center, Sarajevo. Most people don't even know. There's Yugoslavia, as I still call it, right? And there's Bosnia and Herzegovina, where all the fights are going on. And as I'm sure you know from the Olympics or the Civil War, right in the middle of it is Sarajevo. So it's a town in the Balkans, which happens to be a place in which there's a lot of Muslims, a lot of Christians, there were a lot of Jews, Sephardi Jews from Spain. And it became a very important center down till Hitler's time. You understand? There was a Jewish ghetto. By that I mean a Jewish quarter. I don't mean a ghetto, which was very, very Jewish in Sarajevo to the Holocaust, until Hitler destroyed everything. And you've heard of the Sarajevo Haggadah, I'm sure, and things of this nature. It's not just a little town, is what I'm trying to say. Important yeshivas and centers of art and learning. And this guy comes out of that. Remember, the Balkans, I told you last week, which is this whole area over here. Oops. This is the Balkans. Today we have Greece and Macedonia and Bulgaria and all that, Serbia. That was a Sabbatian bastion. That was the main headquarters where you found a lot of people that still believed in Shabtai Tzvi in some sense or another. And Nehemiah grew up exposed to the writings of Rabbi Cardozo, for example, and others. He learned in Israel for a while, moved to Eretz Yisrael for a while, and by the time he was a young man, he was a rabbi in the Balkans. He had a stellar, as we say, although he had a bad reputation as far as women is concerned, but that's not confined, we know, to the 17th century, unfortunately. Getting more and more into Sabbatian theosophy. So he's really asking these questions like the other guy. Who is God? And we have different spheros. If you know a little bit about it, not all the spheres are the same, and some are higher and lower, and there are different elements of them, and there's a casserole, all this stuff. This really preoccupies him. He seems to have wanted to disseminate his own chidushim in theosophy by passing off a Sabbatian text as non-Sabbatian and composing his own Rashi and Tosas to it. Okay? So if you understand, it's very classic Jewish. Upstairs is the main thing, and downstairs you have two mafarshim, like the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Halacha or something along those lines. The upstairs is really from Miguel Cardozo, which he said was from somebody older. And his own Chidushim are what they are. So, first of all, it's a dense text. Who's reading these things? People are, apparently some are anyway, in the 16, 1700s. That's first of all. But second of all, this is how he's going to get his ideas out there. From the little that I can understand of all this, he seems to have been preoccupied with a Trinity idea. And Shabtai Tzvi somehow is like a Jesus figure. There's a Father and a Son. It's not exactly the same, but there's something along the lines of some kind of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And I guess Shabtai Tzvi, although I can't make it out exactly, it represents the Son, or something along those lines. Okay, so it's Jewish but weird, so that's called Sabbatian. In other words, this is an attempt to infiltrate Sabbatian ideas into normative Judaism, because he's passing it off as a regular sefer. The dream of all the Sabbatians is that their work should not be identified as Sabbatian, but on the contrary, it should just be picked up by the regular form world and then influence how Judaism develops. And maybe the Jews won't realize it, but we know. Okay? Now, this is exactly what the opponents were afraid of. Once his sizable text is completed in manuscript form, he travels around the Sephardi Ottoman communities to raise the funds. So he goes to Salonika, Constantinople, Aleppo, the usual place where you have rich people, Alexandria, to raise money. But the local Sephardi rabbis by now are smelling a rat, and they chase him out of the towns. So you see over here, this is the aftermath of the Sabbatian period, and every time a guy like this shows up with a new sefer he wants to get published, they say, oh my God, didn't we go through enough just now, and get out of here. But sometimes the local gvirim, the rich people, fund him generously. So the rabbis in Aleppo say, this guy, he got the reverse of a Rabbi Heinemann ticket. It's the one that says, give this guy nothing, and kick him out. But he was able to use that in a clever way to get to this rich guy and that rich guy. And he said, the rabbi doesn't like him for this reason, but really it's good. And he raised the money. So this is a guy who's a little bit of a charlatan. After a while, the Sephardi rabbis and Kel leaders knew him, and his name was mud in the Eastern Mediterranean. Because after all, you can only get away with this for a while. People do right to each other. Well, in his late 40s, he decides to try his luck in Europe. After all, it's before the telephone, it's before the internet. There wasn't any failed Kabbalist website or anything like that. So he tried his luck in Europe. He went to the non-Ottoman world. Here's where he starts out with in the Turkish Empire. But hey, there's Italy, there's Holland, there's Germany, and even Poland. There's a lot of kahillas that nobody heard about him, and there's a lot of money out there. And maybe he can get his books published and accepted and become mainstream, and he can do well in the process. He not only wants to do good, but he wants to do well. So this is what happens. First, he tries his luck by going to the richest of the Sephardic communities in Europe, and as we all know, that's Leghorn, that's Livorno. Okay, right there in Tuscany, north of Rome. Livorno was a free port, meaning Ronald Reagan, what is it called? Enterprise zone? Remember the enterprise zone idea? Let's put it this way, pure capitalism. The government says, in this town, no taxes, well, there are taxes, but no regs. No unions, no nothing. It's whatever the employer and the employee work out together. If you want to work with you guys 25 hours a day and pay them whatever, if they agree with it, that's it. No OSHA, no, what's the right word, protection against anything. Pure, unadulterated capitalism. These has always been a wonderful means of raising revenue, if you don't mind the social costs. In the 17th century, you don't care about the social costs. And so the Grand Duke of Tuscany, this is famous. Go to Livorno today, you see it's a beautiful city. He says, if you go over there, it's on the Mediterranean, or a branch of the Mediterranean, let's say the Tyrrhenian Sea. And he said like this, any Jew, or a Muslim even, or whatever wants to come here, no questions asked, no ghetto, no bothering you about wearing a Jewish star. You can build whatever shul you want, within reason, and so on and so forth. So it's the exception to Italy. Everywhere else in Italy, Jews are terribly persecuted. They're in stifling ghettos usually, subject to all kind of confiscatory taxes and economic restrictions and things of this nature. Livorno is the big exception. And there the Jews get loaded, okay? Because what they do is they trade with the rest of the Mediterranean, this whole area over here, and they are Sephardim. The Jews that come there are Spanish Portuguese Jews, and they will not let an Ashkenazi in. So consequently, it's a Sephardi heaven, okay? And they do very well, and they're very generous. So most of the Sepharim in the 16, 17, 1800s, whether it's a machzer, or a poetry book, or chidushim, or Shulchan Aruch, or any of that sort of thing, is actually published in Livorno, because somebody will pay for it. You understand? You will find a rich guy to pay for it, just put his name on the front page. Nothing wrong with that. And so, if you're in Nehemiah, go to Livorno. And maybe you can find some rich, dumb Sephardim businessman who will fund your project. The problem is that the local Kabbalist who's resident is a 25-year-old guy named Yosef Irgas, who's the author of the Shomer Emunim, one of the most famous Kabbalistic Sfarim of all time. It's my favorite. And let me put it this way, before you smirk. When they later banned the study of Kabbalah, as the Ashkenazim did in 1756, which is not something I'm going to go into today, they said there are two books that are exceptions, and one of them is this book, okay? Because it's written very clear, all the rest of it. And Yosef Ergas is from a rich family, Livorno and all the rest of it, but he is very, even though he's young, he knows the Kabbalistic stuff so well. He can smell a rat. He has Sabbatian relatives of his own. I mean, who doesn't at this time? And he recognizes the manuscript for what it is. He exposes Hayon as him kicked out of town. So he doesn't have good luck in his beginning in Italy. Well, so Hayon goes to Venice, where he publishes a Kitzer, and he goes to other Jewish communities. The trick is to go someplace where they don't know you so well. Assembles a few haskamas, approbations from rabbis. Imagine if a guy comes in and he says, you know, I have a letter for you for a Moshe Feinstein or something like that. Not bad. But eventually, as we know, he doesn't want to hang around Italy because we say, l'shaker yarchik. If somebody wants to lie, go to somewhere else where they can't catch you up on this. So he goes to Central Europe, to Vienna, to Prague, and Berlin. And this is what he's hanging out. In Prague, which is an Ir Ve'em B'Yisrael, a major center of Jewish culture and the Torah and every aspect of culture in the 17th century, he finds a bunch of trusting types. After all, what do they know? Here's a guy from Eretz Yisrael. He looks religious. He has some heavy-duty manuscript, seems like it's the real thing, including the chief rabbi, the famous Rabbi David Oppenheimer, who was a multi-zillionaire, by the way, and was also not a millionaire, way beyond that, but also a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and a significant Sfarim, and a major book collector. And he persuades him to give him an approbation, a haskama, saying this is a good book. At least on a book of Vorts on the Parshas of Shavuot. But then Hayon takes that, which was written for a book on the Parsha, and prints it on the page of his book for his Kabbalistic stuff. You understand? He said, no, I told you, he's not an honest person. And all of a sudden you have a book, Oz Le'Elohim, as he called it, which is full of Kabbalistic theosophy, but hey, it's got Haskama from the Chazon Ish. For David Oppenheimer, his time was like a big name. You understand? A very big name. And the public doesn't really look at the Haskamas, or what they say. There's a famous story, perhaps you've heard of it. A guy went in the 1920s, I think it was, or 30s, in Galveston, Texas, and went to a rabbi, a Meshulach from Eastern Europe. And I forget the exact details of it, but he said, where'd you get, you don't know too much or something. How'd you get this job? Something to that. He asked one of the people in the shul, where did this rabbi come from? He said, oh, he has smicha from the Chofetz Chaim. He was very impressed because the Chofetz Chaim didn't give smicha. So he's wondering about it. So when he was in the rabbi's office, he looked at the wall, and there was a letter from the Chofetz Chaim, which says like this: "Get the heck out of my yeshiva, you bum! I never want to see you again." Stamped. Yisrael Meir HaKohen Mirad, And the public doesn't read these things. So this is how it goes, even today. Who reads the Haskama, some books? So, but it was part of his strategy of trying, as I say before, to infiltrate his ideas into normative Judaism. He wanted his book to become like a Mesilas Yesharim or whatever. Nehemiah Hayon used this Haskama to secure another Haskama from another Gadol, Naftali Katz from Frankfurt, who had just been kicked out of Frankfurt for playing with practical Kabbalah and therefore causing the Great Fire of Chicago, the Great Fire of Frankfurt. Okay, basically the city burned down, and he was accused. We'll never know. The city burned down, and he was accused of either causing magic, hocus pocus with the Kabbalah to cause the fire. Although that didn't really happen because he was actually tried in court and they didn't find evidence. but they threw him out of town anyway. But some think that when the fire started, he wouldn't let the fire department into the ghetto. Understand? Because he said, I know a certain incantation that'll work, or something like that. As a result, the ghetto burned down and that spread to the rest of the city. Which is why, if you know at all the laws of Shabbos, there's a passage from the Ramah. If you can read it, and not everybody knows this, but in the Shulchan Aruch, they record all kind of laws about fires on Shabbos. And if you go by the Talmudic law, there are certain things you can save and certain things you have to let the house burn down. And take the consequences. There's a whole chapter of this in Masechta Shabbos. But the Ramah, who lived in the 1500s, he says, if you look at the words, it says, Chol adinim in this b'dinei gleka, all these laws, but what you can and you can't save in a fire, hanamila b'mehem. That may have been in the old days, in the time of the Gemara, of bismana zeh. But nowadays, shonashurim b'neinu Yehudim, that we live among goyim, and it'll be the risk of pogrom. If they think the Jews are not putting out the fire or doing their part and cause that, so they'll kill everybody. Therefore, they say, I guess a Jew can put the fire out. I'll say it again, a Jew can put the fire out. Because it could turn into a life and death matter, and whoever does it is harizim b'shubach is better. And he goes on to say, it depends on the situation. If you feel that you can wait for the fire and put it out, put out. Here's a famous rabbi almost got killed because they thought that he caused the fire or at least blocked it. So he's a refugee in Prague, and this Kabbalist shows up, and he said, look, I already have a letter of approbation from the chief rabbi, and why don't you give me another one? And it's all about the Kabbalistic matters and all the rest of it. And this guy said, okay, sounds okay, and he gave it to him. Armed with these haskamas, Nehemiah circulates throughout Germany and Central Europe. He ends up preaching everywhere and selling his books. So here's a guy comes from out of town, and he says, Friday night he'll be speaking in Shomrei. Saturday morning is at the 8:30 minyan in the Aguda. Saturday evening, Shalosh Shodas and this and the shul, and he's going to have a tish in somebody's house. Okay, this is what happens. And he published a book, by the way, of all places in Berlin, posing as strictly Orthodox and a holy man. And as we saw, many of the Sabbatians, honestly speaking, did fast a lot and do these sorts of things. That's always very impressive. He gets traction, although rumors from the Ottoman Empire are starting to make their way. It's not the internet, but slowly but surely they're making their way, and they're also abroad. On June 30, 1713, after circulating a while, try your luck in Amsterdam. He goes to Amsterdam, which is the wealthiest community. And actually, there are two communities there. And therein, my friends, lies a tale. Okay? Because Amsterdam has a Sephardic, Spanish-Portuguese community, and they have an Ashkenazi community that has formed recently. Here's the Chacham of the Spanish-Portuguese, Shlomo Eibeschutz. Eibeschutz is the name of a town in Spain. And the Ashkenazic community, the German-Polish community, is the Chacham Tzvi Ashkenazi. Okay, so it's two communities living side by side. You had that from time to time. Eibeschutz was born in Tzvat and studied under Nathan of Gaza. So here, I'm trying to show you, it wasn't held as a permanent black mark against you that you had been part of the Sabbatian episode after it was over. They figured maybe that was a part of your misspent youth and maybe you moved past it. And perhaps sometimes they did, but not much. After Nathan died, Eibeschutz lived in Palestine until he went to Europe, officially as a shadar, a masholach, on behalf of the Jewish communities in Palestine, visiting various communities and keeping his Sabbatian views to himself. Because he figures if you want to get a job in Europe, just shut up about what you think. Being at the right place at the right time, he became the rabbi of the Sephardim in London in 1689. He's actually the second or third rabbi of England. At that time there were only Sephardic Jews. 1689, that's right when the Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary on the throne, it's long ago, and a very small number of Jews in London, all of them former Catholics, right? It's all Moranos, all feeling their way towards Judaism. What's the big issue, not surprisingly, in London when this guy shows up? Are you going to require adult male Moranos to circumcise? No joke. Right? I'm just trying to show you there was different things rolling at that time. Here he has a rocky time in London because some like him, but he had a faction that suspected every move he made as being Sabbatian, which it may have been. Moreover, he was charged with not being very smart, no Talmud Chacham. He doesn't know like the rabbi before him. And so the bosses of this Sephardi community, what they call the Ma'amad, that's the president, the vice president, the board of directors, which in your Spanish-Portuguese community have dictatorial powers. Okay? Dictatorial powers. And there's a reason for it. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. They came to England, they said, I guess, we are lucky beyond belief. Really, England shouldn't let anybody in. They let in some Jews over here. No Jew should make a scandal. Right? No Jew should do anything without our permission. No Jew, nobody can write a letter to the paper. As we would say today, you're not allowed to call a talk show. Right? Just shut up. Anything that will come from the Jewish community comes through us. Because for the sake of the group, we need that everything should be filtered and said in the right way. And so we have to make sure to police our own members and so forth. This is the world of the Western Sephardic communities. And so here the Ma'amad doesn't like the fact that the rabbi is being criticized. They force the guy who criticized to apologize in front of the Aron Kodesh, but it doesn't mean anything. And after 10 years, he won it out and accepted the rabbinate of the Portuguese in Amsterdam. First he was a Dayan and then the rabbi. Where he was in office when this guy showed up. So I'm trying to show you have a little bit of a perfect storm. The last thing a former Sabbatian who's trying to hold down a regular job and actually got a good stellar over here. Amsterdam, it doesn't get better than that, It's a nice salary, it's good conditions, the climate's not too bad. It doesn't get better than that, not in the 1600s. And the last thing you want is one of your old friends to show up, or somebody from your former background. He's trying to reinvent himself. And nevertheless, he does show up. The trouble is that at the same time that there was a Sephardic community, a Spanish-Portuguese community, which was rather well off. Some of us, I'm sure, have been in Amsterdam, you've seen Spanish-Portuguese shul, even though they're too cheap to pay for heating or air conditioning, but it's a giant and beautiful building, so in other words, they, money they had. There's a separate Ashkenazic Kehillah, whose rabbi was a Gadol Hador, one of the great halachic authorities of all time, the Chacham Tzvi, as they call him. In addition, he was treated very well by the Sephardim, and so that made him have contempt for the Sephardim. He made no attempt to hide his contempt and suspicion of the Sephardic rabbi, who he knew from the background being Sabbatian. The Ashkenazic rabbi was also kind of a Joe McCarthy type, together with his Sephardi friend Moshe Chagiz. So I don't know if you can follow all these names, but last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about Shabtai Tzvi, he was in Jerusalem for almost kicked out by Yaakov Chagiz, who was the big Rosh Hashiva in Yerushalayim. This is the son. So the wrong people are popping up at the wrong time. This would be quite a movie. On the other hand, at that particular time when he shows up, the Chacham Tzvi, who was a great scholar, was a terrible people person. He was in a major battle with his own congregation over contract renewal. Basically, it works this way. They didn't want to renew the contract, and he did. Okay? This has never happened in Baltimore, but Now, ironically, the Sephardim treated him more courteously than his own congregation. So it's quite a interesting situation. Moreover, the Chacham Tzvi is a very unusual Ashkenazic rabbi. And the reason is because, I want to show you something. This is very unusual. He was born here in Moravia from a very big Ashkenazic family. Chacham Tzvi, Tzvi's name is Tzvi Ashkenazi. So what we would call today an elite rabbinic family. And he's born, as I said before, in the heart of Central Europe in Ashkenazville. There are a million yeshivas around here that I'm pointing, in Poland and Germany. Where does he go to get his education? Where's his yeshiva? Look what I'm doing. He goes down to Salonika. It's unique. Right? Salonika was a big Sephardic yeshiva. But why is a guy, let me put it this way. I don't mean to be funny or anything like that. I've heard of, but just seriously, you hear of a lot of Sephardi guys, you hear of a lot of Iranians going and learning near Israel. You don't see a lot of near Israel guys going to learn in Iran. And I don't mean to be funny. You understand? This was the general trend. Here's somebody who's very exceptional. At that time, Salonika, which is a big Sabbatian center, but it's also a big center of big yeshivas as well. And he learned under a famous Sephardic rabbi you never heard of, Yaakov Kobo. And then he moves back and he spends all of his life among the Ashkenazic Jews. That's why his title is Chacham Tzvi and not Harav Tzvi. Although he's 100% Ashkenazi, there's nothing Sephardic about him whatsoever. He doesn't even particularly like Sephardim. But nevertheless, he has in his blood. He can speak Spanish and Portuguese, right? He knows Ladino. He understands their ways. And so it's a very unusual type of situation. And the reason I mention this is, and here it becomes like a play, he had been in Sarajevo and such places. And so when this guy, Nehemiah Hayon, shows up, he says, I know you from somewhere, right? From 20, 25 years ago. And Nehemiah was like, it's someone else, it's not me. It's my brother, right? My long lost twin, it wasn't me. He remembered him from Sarajevo. Now, I mean, how many Ashkenazic rabbis are you going to find that ever had spent time in Sephardicville? And he had received letters, the Chacham say, from the Sephardic chief rabbi of Jerusalem, warning him that Nehemiah Hayon is on the loose. So this is characteristic of the 18th century. A lot of letters back and forth, always warning people about Sabbatianism in different places. It was such an era. You never had this in any other time in Jewish history. And he's heading, they say from Israel, according to reports, to your town of Amsterdam. Hayon, upon arriving in Amsterdam, seeks help from the Sephardim, but they're suspicious. He turns to the Ashkenazim. The Chacham Tzvi says, I know you, you're a Sabbatian. But Hayon said, it's not me, you're mixing me up with someone else. And he convinces him. He convinces Chacham Tzvi, that's right. He convinced him, who then says, okay, I guess I was wrong. So then this newcomer is unobjectionable. As a result, the Spanish-Portuguese community says, okay, then if you say he's okay, then he's okay. And they come and give money and help him out and all this sort of thing. At that particular time, the buddy of the Chacham Tzvi, who, if you can follow this, is a Sephardi, Moshe Chagiz, the son, I feel like a soap opera, the son of the Rosh Yeshiva who kicked Shabtai Tzvi out, he was out of town, but he came back to Amsterdam a little bit later. Professor Karlbach, Elisha Karlbach, from Columbia University, written a whole biography of Moshe Chagiz, if you're interested. And he smelled a rat. He advises the Mahamad, and he's Sephardic himself, the lay leadership of the Spanish community of Amsterdam, examined the guy's papers. I don't trust him. I want to see his manuscripts to see if they're heretical. But Nehemiah Hayon said like this, I can't produce them at the present time, and anyway, what are you bothering me about this for? But he gives a copy to the rabbi, Shlomo Eilon. In other words, a fellow communist, who now is cursing his bad luck. He said, I needed this guy to show up. Like I said, everything was going great. Life was good. And then somebody from the long lost past shows up. Well, Moshe Chagiz, you got the wrong guy. He launches a Mossad operation, and he and a Sephardi steal, or if you wish, purloin, some of the papers of Hayon, which they then steal. They got him out of a hotel room, and they robbed his chest and all that. And they take him right to the Chacham Tzvi. So this is a soap opera. The Chagiz and the Chacham Tzvi then sit down and jointly go through the papers with a fine-tooth comb. And they conclude they are Sabbatian. They read his commentary. At this point, the Spanish-Portuguese Mahamad proposes, because they're starting to feel a bit silly, they gave money and they said they published his book. Let's set up a joint Ashkenazi Sephardi commission representing both communities to formally and officially investigate and take action. Makes sense to me. But the Chacham Tzvi, I told you, had terrible people skills. And so he declines to sit in a basin with the Portuguese Jews. First of all, they're Amoratzim in these matters. They don't understand anything about Sabbatianism. And Hayon will bamboozle them. Secondly, the rabbi himself will freeze him because the rabbi's traitor. This is what he writes publicly. That's an insult. You can say what you want about it. You're putting out in the paper, Rabbi Heideman's a Sabbatian. That's what he's saying. And so the Mahamad is real angry, and they set up their own commission. This is already starting to get ethnic, you see. And they summon the Chacham Tzvi to testify. He declines. I'm not subject to your commission. Okay. And the Mahamad then conducts its own investigation. During the investigation and its deliberations, the Chacham Tzvi unilaterally publishes a pamphlet in which he declares Hayon to be a heretic, and he places him in cherub, which is a gross violation of states' rights. What do I mean by that? He's Ashkenaz. He doesn't have the right to make a Sephardi a cherub. You can only put somebody from your community in cherub. You're actually treading. He's the one who would interfere. He would protest, right? Because you can't have North Carolina can put somebody in North Carolina cherub. You can't put South Carolina cherub, and vice versa. If you're Ashkenaz, you only can put a cherub somebody from Ashkenaz. You can't debate with it. you're insulting our dignity as a community. I'm doing this for a reason. So the Ma'amad is made to look like a joke. The Portuguese Jews are furious, which plays in the hands of the pretender Hayon. Okay? You end up with a battle of synagogues, which one, who's more chashuv, the Portuguese or the Ashkenaz? In other words, it totally lost its character of being questionable about heresy and ideology and the purity of Judaism and all this stuff. It became old-fashioned catfight. Who's, my community is stronger than your community. Okay? Spartan rock. No, that's going to you like that. The Ma'amad then publishes its conclusions of its commission. They say Hayon is kosher, and anyone who disagrees with them and opposing them is opposing the Ma'amad. The pamphlet published by the Chacham Tzvi is publicly burned in the synagogue. The Chacham Tzvi and Moshe Giz ridiculed this publicly. So, oh boy, Amsterdam was an interesting place in 1713, 1714. Intercommunal strife goes nuclear, my friends. A great number of pamphlets are then issued by both sides, in which the contestants indulged, and I'm quoting over here, in the most vehement abuse of each other. So you get a hold of these kind of things they sell in Sotheby's, for thousands of dollars because they're rare. But my goodness, they threat each other. On 23 July 1713, the Chacham Tzvi placed Hayon under the cherem, as I said, because the investigating committee appointed by the Sephardi director had not yet made its report. In consequence of this measure, both Chacham Tzvi and Moshe Giz were subject to street attacks. So the physical attack on the street, more particularly at the hands of the Portuguese, who threatened to kill them. So, my goodness, things really went hot. In the midst of the constantly increasing bitterness and animosity, the report of the committee, which had been prepared by Rabbi Eibeschutz himself, was publicly announced to the effect that the Hayon was okay and it contained nothing which could be construed as offensive to Judaism. It was publicly announced in the synagogue that Hayon was to be exonerated of every suspicion of heresy, and then the next day in the Spanish-Portuguese shul, a public reception was tendered him by the synagogue, on which occasion unparalleled honor was shown him. So this has nothing to do with the victim anymore. This has to do with the Catholic. Naturally, Sephardic opponents of Ashkenazi, if you can follow that, the Sephardic opponents of the Chacham Tzvi, had found excellent support among the rabbi's adversaries in his own Ashkenazic synagogue. Remember I told you they didn't want to renew his contract anyway? So now everything comes out of the woodwork. They're smart enough to get him. The Ashkenaz said, I guess, we'll support you and get rid of this guy. And oh my goodness. And I'm going to repeat what I said before. As far as rabbinical knowledge is concerned, he was really one of the 2 or 3 top rabbis in the world at that time. But not in my shul. Not in my shul. And so, probably he forgot to give somebody the Torah to hold, Kippur or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, the controversy was waged so fiercely that the family life of the community became affected, which means that they, how should I put this? They blew up each other's makers, let's put it that way. And all peace vanished from the otherwise model congregation of Amsterdam. The Chacham Tzvi was deserted except for a few friends who remained faithful to him. But finally, he was summoned by the Ma'amad of the Portuguese synagogue to appear before their tribunal. He refused to do so, as he anticipated he would be asked to retract and to praise Hayon. Then they said, fine, if you won't listen to that, we'll take it to court. And so they get a lawyer, Christian lawyer, and the Ma'amad summoned him to appear on 9th November 1713. And when he refused, they were formally placed in the cherem by the Portuguese community. And this is the time when they took these things seriously. Ashkenazi, the Chacham Tzvi, was temporarily placed under arrest in his own home to protect his life by the police. So basically, he said, if you go to the house, we can't guarantee your safety. This is quite interesting. Right? Who had been influenced against him by a lot of the Portuguese leaders. The whole matter was brought before the Dutch government, by the government, in order to secure his deposition and banishment from Amsterdam. So basically, the Spartans include a bunch of millionaires, and they had a lot of clout with the Dutch government. And basically saying, this guy's a troublemaker, he's not even a citizen, get him out of here. The magistrates, which means the courts, thereupon sought the opinions of certain professors at the University of Leiden, Utrecht, and Harderwijk, including Serenius and Redland, famous names on the dispute. So basically, Oivenu Plilin, as they say in the Chumash. I want you to understand the irony of the situation. But since this is just for Tisha B'Av, we can talk about it. It's the Spanish community, the Sephardim, want the government to just do a unilateral action and have this guy, Ashkenazi, thrown out because he's been put under a religious ban because he dissed the other side. But in Holland, they have freedom of religion. And so the question becomes, is this guy violated the tenets of Judaism or other kind of freedom of religion, which justify a government expulsion order? And it's so complicated because it's hard to explain them. Sabbatianism, Theosophy, the Spheros, the Keser Elyon, the Ein Sof. The Dutch government didn't do it, so they wrote to the professors, Christian professors. Cyrenius was the guy who translated the Rambam and the Mishnah into Latin. If that means anything. Cyrenius is really. And, this is pretty sad, right? Here you have a fight all over the Jewish community, and they're bringing in the others to do it. Well, their decision, if given, has not been known. But the Chachamsi forestalled the magisterial action by resigning his office and fleeing at the beginning of 1714 from Amsterdam, secretly with the aid of a friend named Delima. So he flees disguised as somebody else, being driven by a Sephardi who sticks with him. Right? You can't make this up. You get what I'm saying? A Sephardic member who disapproves of what his own community is doing and thinks it's terrible is going to be here, and that this guy really is a Sabbatian, helps the Ashkenaz rabbi flee his own congregation in the middle of the night. Anyway, after leaving his wife and children at Emden in Germany, he proceeded to London at the invitation of the Sephardic congregation at the city, and then the Chachamsi went on to go to Poland, where he was treated with Kavod Malachim, became the rabbi in Lemberg, and all this kind of thing. Went on to a very distinguished career among people who treat him very differently. Because what I just described can only happen in some new Dodge City type town like in Western Europe called Amsterdam or London or something like that. In Poland at that time is unthinkable, right? Vilna, Lublin, Krakow, a place like that, someone of his stature would not be treated along these lines. Well, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the Hayon, who is really a snake, that brought all this into the community, everything was doing great until he showed up, publishes a book, and that's the one you see over here called Tzvi, attacking the Chacham Tzvi as an ignoramus and a liar, and so on and so on. Tzvi, Chacham Tzvi, you captured I captured you. But then, after the Spanish-Portuguese community says our honor and dignity, kavod, has been satisfied, and we showed who's the real boss over here, and ha ha ha, then they're made to look stupid. Because, letters and post office takes a long time, but eventually it happens. One letter after another comes from all over the world. From Italy, from Greece, from Israel, from Egypt, from Turkey, and so forth. Are you guys nuts? You kick this guy out for this. Don't you know you're dealing with over here? Are you crazy? And they have so much egg with their face that they do what groups like this always do. They prohibit discussion in the community. And after a few months, they told this guy, just get out, here's some money, and then hit the road, don't ever come back again. You understand? So in other words, everybody ended up looking foolish in this affair. And this is only one of many. So what happens? You end up in a situation in which for a year or two about a year before they actually kick the guy out, a war of words rages throughout the Jewish world for those who are interested in theosophical matters. There's Moshe Chagiz versus Hayon. Chagiz, this guy, he was an indefatigable writer. As he writes his book, the Hayon is a liar and a mamzer and this and that, and the other guy writes against him, no, you are. Then you have this very interesting fights between Irgas from Livorno and Hayon. That's already very philosophical. And the question over there is, who has Tzimtzum right? And each one accuses the other one of having totally wrong, and therefore being a heretic. There's what they call Tzimtzum Kipshuto and Tzimtzum Shalom, which is too technical to go into over here. But here you have it, and these pamphlets are being published when God creates nothing. So how does that happen? Does it really something happen, or is it just metaphorical? Like I said, but they're, dissing each other. And then very interestingly, the chief rabbi of London, who took the place of Eibeschutz, his name was Nieto, who was an Italian Jew, a big Talmud Chacham. He's an MD also. Okay, he's a major astronomer. Very interesting individual. He was actually brought into London to try to bring some quality into the situation. He's a very remarkable individual, and he knew 10 languages and things like this. Held in very high regard by the Christian professors. Okay, they come from Oxford and Cambridge to talk to him. He explains to them the Christian calendar. He says he was very interested in the fact that because of the screw-ups in the Julian calendar, that was the time when they were general switching from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, and not everybody did it at the same time, right? So you have a general idea what I'm talking about. And so one year, I think Easter came after Pesach, and I freaked everybody out, or maybe I said it wrong. Easter came before Pesach, whatever it is, it's the opposite of what it should be. And he was very into getting the astrological tables. He wrote like 100, 200 years calendar and things of that nature. Very impressive individual. And he gets in there, and he's a big Kabbalist and he's a big philosopher. As I said before, he had an MD, which in those days, if you know what medicine was a branch of philosophy. I know it sounds funny to us today, but I'm talking about what it was at that time. He's a graduate of the University of Padua, which is the leading university, and that means he had a PhD, as we would say, a doctor of philosophy, as well as a doctor of medicine. His shul paid him not to practice, because they were on a full-time sort of thing. It's a very interesting individual. And here's his book, Eibeschutz, which is basically two hell in a handbasket with the Chayut. The guy's a fake and a faker, and a phony, and the rabbi supporting him is the same thing. And here you have an important figure over here, and Tzvi is right. Now, some people accuse it of a little bit of, what's the right word, favoritism, because this is just an interesting tidbit. This rabbi was an eminent intellectual, as I just described, and it was a serious Talmud Chacham. I told you that Spinozism is running around. Some are trying to answer the questions of life through science and philosophy, and some through Kabbalah. And many in the Spanish-Portuguese community are not learned in Kabbalah, so they read articles and papers and journals about philosophy. And he tries to explain in a sermon, a very famous sermon, books have been written on this, in 1700 or 1702, something like that, how science and religion works. And basically he says that God is and nature are the same, which can be taken in one of two ways. And many in the congregation didn't like him. They made a whole hullabaloo. They said, "Oh, you're a Spinozist. Because you see, God and nature are the same," which means you're saying God is just another word for nature. And they want to get him in trouble, even though the truth he was a very firm person. And at that time, they referred this question, it's a very famous tshuva, to the Chacham Tzvi, who was at Hamburg, the eminent Ashkenazi posek. And he has a whole teshuva there about the sermon of David Nieto. And he clears him, because he says, "You guys," he's your rabbi, you're too stupid to understand what he's saying. He said God is nature. He didn't mean that God is nature, but nature. I don't have it now. Not that God is identical with nature, but nature is identical with God. You know what I'm saying. What you consider to be nature is really God operating. He just operates through the mechanism of nature. Right? That's what it means to say. Which is when, no, this is a from God. And he saved him, because once he got a okay from, like I say, the Chazanish, the Holy One, that was the end of that. And so I'm just trying to tell you, it was an era in which Hashkafa mattered. And here's the famous book he writes, the second Kuzri Hasheni, to fight against Spinozism. And here's the second book he writes, Eibeschutz, against the Hayon and the Sabbatians. This book, by the way, is published from time to time. This one about the Kuzri Hasheni is very interesting. It's very well written, because he's Italian Jew, he knows Hebrew very well, how to write. And it's an interesting set of arguments against Spinozism. Really, it's a very interesting era in history. Well, all this is going on, and it shows that Judaism, as I said before, was kind of between a rock and a hard place, because for the young people growing up who are interested in questions more than just simple practice, what time is mincha, Judaism was between a rock and a hard place. Some were inclined to go this direction, the Nieto route, others to go the Spinoza route. The trick was to keep away from both. For some people that works. Just concentrate on Gemarashi Tosus, as they say. But not everybody's built that way. And so Judaism was going through difficult times in terms of relating to the trends of that era. In fact, that's why in Italy, it's very interesting. Nieto was from Italy. They had a certain Haskalah, which was an Orthodox Haskalah. In other words, they were very educated. These are famous Italian rabbis. They don't look like rabbis, but they're big Talmidei Chachamim. This is the Shalos and Chuvas Shemesh Tzedakah, Shimshon Bar Kokhba, big posik. They don't look like it. This is the Chuvas Chassanim from Meldola, from Livorno. Again, he looks like an opera star. This is none other than the Zera Emes. That's a huge Shalos and Chuvas sefer from Modena, Shmuel HaKohen. I mean, it's a very important halachic source. And again, he does it. And this is Shabtai Marini. He is the Rebbe of the Ramchal, of Shechem Satan. It's not what you think. People don't understand Italy. And every one of these people was very frum, very learned, Italy marches to his own drummer. And the reason I say that is, so in Italy, the young people did go to college, and as a result, since they had all these issues that were going on at that time, the rabbis encouraged the young to get into Kabbalah. Isn't that interesting? Because they figure that will provide them with possibly with the answers that philosophy and science don't provide. It's interesting. They knew that there were dangers that many of them end up in Sabbatian stuff and all the rest of it, but they figured it's better than becoming an atheist and Spinoza. It's not the world you imagine. I always tell you 100 times, take off the glasses you're wearing in 2015, try to put on the glasses of 1715. Okay? As for the Nehemiah, by the way, the end is, they eventually kicked him out of town. He went from place to place. He had his adventures. He died penniless, friendless, abandoned, and all that sort of thing. So, everything I just described was not a matter of wild parties. It was not a matter of eating ham and making a bracha. It didn't involve that. It was a question of philosophy, of theosophy, actually, which is really interesting. Because I'm sure the Republicans who were fighting in Amsterdam have no idea, my brother's bigger than your brother, the Sephardim, Rockford, Ashkenaz, they didn't know really what's going on. But it wasn't over. Because Nehemiah had circulated around, had met and sometimes influenced people, and there were nests of Sabbatians in a lot of places. As a result, the Kehillas, the Jewish communities, the autonomous, coercive Jewish communities, were rightly worried about local communists. They often interrogated strangers in Mishalachim before they admitted them to town. This is the 1700s. A guy shows up. It's not that you need a tu'udah to see if you're a faker. It's a tu'udah to know if you're a Sabbatian. And second of all, who's your tu'udah from? This rabbi, I never heard of him. Maybe he's a Sabbatian. And even if you tell me you got from rabbi to rabbi, how do you know you didn't forge it? After all, Sabbatians are believing forgery as a principle. It was a hard time. And so, informers and delators have a field day. This is an era in which anybody knows something about someone else. Like today, you put it on the blog. That time, you put it by writing it to famous rabbis and circulating it that way. True, not true. This is what you believe. This is what you hear. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they don't get it right. The 18th century is just loaded with this. Polish Jews were considered especially problematic because Poland's such a huge area, the largest Jewish community. These Mishalachim come beggars and whatever come from Poland all the time, circulating throughout Germany and Bohemia and Amsterdam and places like that. First of all, you don't know. First of all, we have the same problem today. Some Mishal comes up, you don't know what kind of faker is or not a faker. That's number one. But second of all, totally aside from that set of issues, you don't know if you're supporting some big Shabtai Tzvi operation or something Orthodox Jewish. That adds an extra dimension to the problem. So, this is the 18th century. One of these Polish Jews circulating around, was Moshe Meir of Tzalkiev. Tzalkiev was a famous Jewish town near Brody, printing press. He embarks in 1725, a few years after this incident that I just described, on a Sabbatian missionary trip across Central Europe. Okay? He's armed with a lot of papers and things like this. His idea is to go from town to town and recruit, first of all, make contact with the local Reds, and second of all, have little meetings, party meetings, in which you recruit new recruits. You get it? This is how it's done. You go to a town and you say like this, who's the local guy? This guy and this guy. Could be a rabbi, could be a chazan, could be a shoemaker, could be anybody. They get them together, and meanwhile, out in public, the guy looks like anybody else, and he spends an extra time with Shemon Esrei. You couldn't tell. But when he goes to this guy's house, he locks the doors, he's like this, give me a list of names of people who could become communists, right? Who look potential and, right for recruitment. And they get him. He comes to place this town to this town to that town. Eventually comes to Mannheim, which is in western Germany. Mannheim is about 50 miles north of Frankfurt. To the famous cloys of Rabbi Moses Reagan. There was a guy who was a court Jew, he had army contracts. He gave 100,000 gulden to set up a Karen Kayemet for a cloys, for yeshiva, back in 1708. What kind of money are you talking about? 100,000 to be a permanent endowment. By the way, it wasn't there till Hitler. For all I know, the money might be in a bank somewhere today. But that's a serious money. and in the 1700s. And the idea was you should set up like a cola of 20, 30 guys, full-time, no financial worries, and there should be a yeshiva attached to it. So it was a very interesting situation. The Duke lived in Mannheim, so that was a ducal center. And everybody in that class is a Sabbatian, right? This is the welcome to the 18th century. The Maggid Shir, the guys who are learning Yeridea, the guys who are doing Choshen Mishpat, by day it's Clark Kent. By night it's Les Luthor. It's what it was. And so he comes over there. Now here again, you can't make this story up. He meets a Kleis member, or he wasn't a Kleis member. He used to learn there. A guy named Pesachia, who immediately discerns the nature of this new guy. He pretends to be a secret Sabbatian. So this new guy, Moshe Meir, reveals to him his Sabbatian mission. I'm here to recruit new people. Pesachia then tells two visiting from rabbis from Frankfurt, meaning the guy who's leading him on sees visiting the town, Mannheim, two genuine firm rabbis from Frankfurt. He said, I want you to know, we got a guy over here, and he's not what he looks like. Together, the three of them do like a banunu. They lure him to Frankfurt. You understand? They turn him over to Frankfurt. And there, they meet with him secretly, meaning when they get to, it's a sting operation. When he comes to Frankfurt, they meet with him secretly and say, oh, we're on your side. We want to start a Shabtai Tzvi operation over here. They obtain, so he gives out these pamphlets and manuscripts which you give out to the initiates. No one else is allowed to see them, and he thinks they're on his side. They immediately take these to the Beis Din of Frankfurt. That time the rabbi was popular as the Shabtai. I know that these names don't mean a lot to a lot of people, but if you know the halacha world, they're famous names. And then he's hauled in front of the Frankfurt Beis Din, and he's exposed, and they confiscate all of his written material. They throw him in jail, and they break into his apartment, into a hotel room, and they take everything. Well, guess what? He's got a huge chest, because this guy was a major missionary, and basically, it's Snowden's WikiLeaks. You understand? It's tons and tons of names, and contacts, and information from all across Europe. And it's Snowden's WikiLeaks, because it's shocking. This rabbi, I thought he was this Rosh Hashiva, this guy here, the Gabbai, the Shmabai, the Baal Koreh, the this, the that, the other. You understand? It's a shock and awe. Goes through the Jewish world. Okay? And it's a cornucopia of sensitive information about Sabbatian sympathizers and fifth columnists scattered throughout Europe, Ashkenaz Europe. Now they were outed. And now begins the night of the long knives. Starting 1725, 1726, in every community, they go after these guys. Okay? I don't know what they did. They kicked them out, they killed them, they did, who knows what they did, okay? And kill after kill, and they're punished, they're expelled, or otherwise penalized. For example, in Mannheim, the entire Kleis was fired. Right? They cleaned house. You get it? All these guys, the Sabbatians, hit the road, they all had to go back to Poland and broke. Till now, they had a good deal, boy, they messed themselves up. To use today's standards, they were like a Palo Alto, like $100,000 a year. They were living the life of Riley, and now they're all out. The whole place was replaced from top to bottom. Similar thing happens in places like Prague, in which whole Klaises, whole yeshivas turn out to be, from top to bottom, secret Sabbatians. And no one had an idea. In other words, they had an idea in general, but no one knew the extent of the communist conspiracy, as J. Edgar Hoover used to say. Okay? And it reaches the tentacles everywhere. Now, listen closely. The problem here is, just because somebody's name is on the list doesn't necessarily mean it's true. This is the problem with McCarthyism. Agreed? Right? Agreed? Just because they say this person here, that person, this lady, whatever, did this and this, doesn't automatically mean that it really happened. But it does smell like a rat. Right? They could, and there's no question that a number of people were falsely accused of it. On the other hand, how come my name's not on there and your name is? Like that. That's shocking all. Okay? In this case, the interrogators in Frankfurt, in 1725, they found the manuscript of Theosophic stuff that seemed to be modeled on the writings of Nehemiah Hayon, but they were a lot racier. Okay? And who was the author? It wasn't signed. It's a big manuscript. It wasn't signed. It just started. Lion. That who was it? Yaakov said, "I came today to the well," and he meets Rachel. But here, the well means the well of Chachma. Right? So, who's the author? And they start reading it, and they freak out. This is like Hayon, but it's X-rated. They interrogate him. He won't tell. They use physical pressure on him. He says, "Yonas and Ancients." That's what it starts. He said, "Oh, the private." Down in the United States, he goes, "Don't say on the answer." That's what he said. Shock and awe. Can it be? Or could it? And others say the same thing. Notice they do some investigation in Prague. People say, "Yeah, Yonas and Ancients." And so this throws this well beyond WikiLeaks into like a crisis in the system. Because Yonas and Ancients was the most important rabbi in the first half of the 18th century. Very unusual person. 1690, 1764. Again, the years are important. 1690, 10 years after the death of Nathan, and 1764 lived a relatively long life, right through the 1700s. The Gadol in terms of quantity, or let's put it this way, a lot of people that way. Yonas and Ancients was from a poor but very yichustic family in Krakow. He ended up in learning yeshiva Panamiris in Moravia, which is a big Sabbatian center. He ended up at a young age, like in 20, 21, in Prague. He was offered Reichmann's daughter. He was offered a shidduch. It's a famous story. Samson Wertheimer, the court Jew of the Emperor of Austria, the guy who was financing all the armies and mega loaded. He had a daughter. The only problem was she was missing an eye. She couldn't see only one eye. And he offered a dowry, it's a famous story, 70,000 gulden. That's incredible money. And everybody made a joke. He's offering Ayin Tachas Ayin. So, and he turned it down, right? And instead he married a poor girl with big yichus. So just very interesting. And he settles down in Prague, and he sits a base marriage, and he giving shiurim, and just students flock to him. He's incredibly charismatic, and he doesn't. This is something I found out a year ago myself. He doesn't fundraise. He gets a law degree, and he practices law, and that's what supports his yeshiva. Now, not a regular law degree, just like in England, there's a barrister and whatever solicitor. I don't know how he did it in Bohemia in the early 18th century, but there was a certain type of advocate, and business law, by the way. And it's interesting if you look at his drushes, which is one of my favorite books, the Yaris Tavash. He says you cannot really understand Kosher Mishpah unless you know the Juris Civilis, unless you know the Roman Civil Law, okay? Which is just an interesting commentary because he's the Ur B'Tumim on Kosher Mishpah. He's one of the most important commentaries on Jewish civil law, and he was extraordinarily charismatic. They say in his lifetime, in other words, in 40 years of teaching, he had 20,000 students. Now, I don't know if you do those numbers, but do those numbers. How many new students are you talking about every year? 500 or something like that, which can be true. But even if you cut it in half, you see, he had 250 new students attract them every year. That blows their mind. And his enemies, and he had enemies, later on, Yaakov Emden was a big enemy. He said, "I'm not impressed with your 20,000 students." So notice, he spotted him, he stipulated that. So here you're talking about somebody that was a magnetic personality in terms of education, an educator, the like of which I don't know personally. I'm not familiar with the Jewish history based on the amount of information that we have. I know you can get a little bit of an idea from some of the memoirs of his students. I just remember one of them, Austerlitz. He said, because later on when he's in trouble, he asked his students to write testimonials on his behalf, and they did. And he says, I came to the yeshiva at the age of 13 or 14. I was there for like 4 years. Then my father died back in the little town in Moravia, and the community elected me as the rabbi to succeed my father. So he's 17 or 18 years old, and they already made a shidduch for me. Yes, but he can't be a rabbi without being married. So he's on his way to leave the yeshiva unexpectedly early, and he was one of the favorite students or something like that. And this is what he writes. And I went to see Rosh Yeshiva, he was in Eibeschutz, and I said, my father died, and this and that and the other. So he said, Oh, that's terrible. First of all, before anything else, I'm giving you smicha right now. It's very nice. Second of all, how can I part from someone who I'm so close with? You're getting married. I have to give you a wedding present. What can I give you? You won't believe this. He takes his lighter, his wife's silver candlesticks that he's had from a wedding dowry. He said, "Take this to be a memento. This will be a present from me and my wife to you and yours." You understand? So either he does that all the time, right? Or he's got a whole supply, or it's the real thing. If it's the real thing, wow. If I was that guy, I'm loyal. You see what I'm saying? Notice, that's the best they get. Rabbi Eibeschutz also was a huge Talmud Chacham. He's considered the foremost pilpulist. If not of all time, but one of the top ones. In terms of the lumpus. You understand? There's nobody that's in that league. He was one of the few people who give these 8-hour, 9-hour shiurim on one subject, like trying this and bringing a totally separate subject, come together, make a new problem, and he could actually do that. So the students were on wonder, and thousands poured in over the years, mainly in Prague. And now he's accused of having written this, which is this was published by a friend of mine, a friend of mine at Hopkins, right? He specialized in heresy. Now, we'll be selling copies at the end of the class. But seriously, it doesn't compute. How do you figure this all out? Now, Jonas Eibeschutz hotly denies it all. He swears in the Sefer Torah that's not true. But what good does that do? To the enemies, it's like this. If he's real, he doesn't need to swear. If he's not real, he'll swear 10 times. It doesn't mean anything. Like the Muslim of Takia, they can do whatever they want. He publicly condemns Sabbatianism, makes a whole speech, and he says whoever wrote these books are traitors. But again, those are like, yeah, that's what he said, but what does it really mean? And so you can't win in this kind of a situation. The rabbinic world, and I'm talking about in 1725, accepts his word. They want to, including somebody named Emden, who later on, many years later, will emerge as his bloody opponent. But in 1725, they say like this, a person like this, it just doesn't compute. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's not possible. And by the way, I would point out, as time went on, majority of the graduated rabbis holding positions throughout Europe, his students. So if you say that this guy's Jay, watch what you're doing. And so, Eibeschutz then goes on to glory years. 1725, 1730s, 1740s. That's when he gets to 20,000 students, and he produces his amazing. I want you to understand this is a very unusual person. There are many stories. For example, he's the real thing. He was missing. It was a snowy day, and they're looking for him outside because he went out for a minute to think. And he's one of these people, like Salvation, that's thinking in abstract terms, and they couldn't find him. And the end of the story is it snowed with him. It was a cover. He was so orangutropped and learning, that he even noticed his cover snow until finally it's like this. That's the answer to the Rambam, and all the snow came off. So no, he's that type. You understand? If he wanted to, wait a second. In addition to what I just said, being a pilpulist, he's a master in Maggid Shir, as we would say today. He was a master orator, which the two don't go together at all. In Europe, usually somebody's rabbi couldn't speak to save his life. It wasn't called for that job. Instead, they had somebody called a Maggid. But Eibeschutz was a master, maybe one of the 3 or 4 greatest orators that we know about in rabbinic history. That's quite a statement I just said. And if you're familiar at all with the Yaris Bash and the other things that he's written, he is a master rhetoric because he has this serious stuff, then he throws in a little humor, then he throws in Musar, and he throws in this. It's just remarkable. He used to give speeches when he did in Shabtai and the 7th of Adar and Tisha B'Av time that were like 7-8 hours, and people didn't leave. Okay, I want you to understand 7-8 hours. So where are you going to sit down and listen to somebody for 7-8 hours? It was incredible. And then in addition to that, he was considered the major Kabbalist of the time, meaning that he knows the Arizal stuff better than anybody else, or just about. So in other words, any category you can think of, he's a 1 for, a 2 for, a 3 for, a 4 for. How do you get a big posek, right? Which doesn't necessarily come from being a big Maggid Shir. And he wrote seminal works on Kosher Mishpat and Yerodea, something that we're talking about, the crazy placey. He says this does not fit the profile of somebody who's interested in Shabtai Tzvi. Why is he going to do this? You see, this is what made it so different. If you tell me the rabbi of the Portuguese synagogue of Hayon, you know what I mean, right? Someone like a chazan here, a little rabbi there, whatever, Baltimore, This you're talking about world-class figure, the like of which doesn't exist. He eventually becomes, now, I want to warn you, the hour is late, and so there's no way that I can do what we call the Emden Eibeschutz controversy. I'm just giving you the beginnings of it, and maybe we'll save it for some other time, although it's a wild and crazy story of its own. But I'm showing you how it emerges out of Nehemiah Hayon, which emerges out of Sabbatianism. And I told you at the beginning that I can only follow one or two of these and do a little bit. That's why I said, without trying to be funny or trite, that this is Sabbatianism is something that requires 6 or 7 or 8 talks of its own. It really is a huge subject. But just to finish this up for the little bit that we're going to do, eventually he left Prague during a war when the French army was besieging Prague. He went to Metz to become rabbi there in France. In 1745, there was a group starting convening that did not believe him. He had a lot of fans. We also had those that didn't believe him. When he issues amulets, and the amulets do work, right? Give a cameo, right? For a lady having trouble with childbirth, for people with this kind of illness. So, I mean, I understand that we're all laughing at it. Look, I don't know what to do with it, but he had notary publics in Hamburg and other places. They say, we don't know how he does it, but this stuff works. So, I don't know. I mean, like I say, I don't know. But when he issues these things, they're purloined, they're copied, and they're decoded to reach Shabtai Tzvi. And when this reoccurred in 1751, years later, when he became a rabbi in Hamburg, all hell broke loose. But that's too much to go into now. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. They opened one of his amulets, and it said this in it. This is like 80% of it. The rest has to do with the Magen David, with certain words written into the Magen David. So this is a gibberish, correct? For the uninitiated. And obviously, obviously it's a code. What do you call it, a cipher? I'm not an expert in that. It's a cipher. Hatbash, this means one letter transposed to mean another. And that's how Kabbalists apparently write it. Now, believe it or not, there is a book that has a list of all the ciphers, and this is not in it, which was a problem that people had. Remez, Ramaz, has a book called Sharshi Hashem, and all the types. But he claimed he knew better than him and all that stuff. There's a whole, that's why I say I can't explain this in 1 minute. But if you decode this in certain words in certain places, it's actually not that hard. It could possibly be decoded in certain parts of the Shabtai Tzvi. Okay? So that's where it's coming from. So is that something you can hang somebody on? On the other hand, it does seem weird that it could be decoded that way. On the other hand, how do you know it means that way? You get it? What I'm trying to say is he never was caught doing something. But it boils down to these sorts of things. So suffice it to say, and I'm skipping over a lot, that the rabbis eventually divided the 3 groups in relation to this, A, B, and C. One group said he's guilty of sin, is indicated from what happened in 1725 and from this. Case closed. That's the Pnei Yoshua and Yaakov Emden and many others. From that time, they said, this guy's funny as a $2 bill. I don't care what they say. There's another group that said he is not guilty. The amulets have been tampered with or incorrectly decoded. And this, he published a book in the middle of the whole crisis, full of letters from his students, and they had a very good point to make. And they said, you tell me he's a Sabbatian when? We're with him 24/7. This is the type of guy I told you, sitting out freezing in the cold, sitting and learning. So you know the type. He's holding and learning literally all day long. If I'm there in the morning, evening, afternoon, when's he doing the Shabtai Tzvi stuff? We see it. That's a good argument. The third opinion was he's guilty, but since he denies it, take him at his word and let's move past this. And that was the famous opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said, Judaism is suffering by this whole business. We'll never know the real truth. Smells like a rat. He says, if I decode it, it would look bad, but I'm not. But I might be wrong. So take him at his word and let's move on. Most of the point I'm getting at, and I'm near the end, is that most of the Jewish people have no idea about the theosophy issues being debated here. In the 18th century, when they hear Shabtai Tzvi, they're more interested in the lurid details. They're fascinated and repelled by wild parties, wife snapping, ritual eating, pork, and all this other stuff, than by theosophy questions, even though theosophy is a major part of it, as you see. Since the hour is late, I'll conclude by making one observation on the historical significance of Sabbatianism as we end just before Tisha B'Av. Anybody knows? Some of you know where I live. When I first moved there many years ago, there was a bunch of trees around the house. Now, I think they're all gone. Now, one of the trees was hit by lightning. Another tree we cut down for a certain reason, but I had two apple trees in the front. And you know what apple trees are? It's a mess in the summer, but they grow fruit. Then come the cicadas. And wait a minute. and they killed one. The second time they wounded the other. They survived barely. It took like 7, 8, 9 years to recover. And then the third time they came, they finished up the second. You get it? The Sabbatians like cicadas. It attacked the tree of Judaism, and it wounded it badly. Some of it it killed, and some of it didn't kill, but it made it very weak. He said it still have recovered. That's what I'm talking about over here. The note of Yehuda, when he writes his famous letter in regard to what I just described, what's the story with the Jonas and Eibeschutz, he mentions in there, he says, and he's crying, he says, it's been our boast that unlike other religions, we do not have denominations and sects. The Muslims from day one have been split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. That's a big one, besides the others. The Christians, oh my goodness, they've been divided 100 ways before the Catholic Church even started. The Monophysites and the Coptics and the Ethiopic Turks and the Nestorians, you have no idea. Plus the numerous ones that are now. So, and Judaism in the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 1700s was just Judaism. Some were a little bit more on the right, some were a little more on the left. Some were the Rambam type, some were the Zohar type. You know what I'm saying? It was all one family belief. Everybody believed in the Torah. However, everybody believed in the mitzvahs. Everybody believed that God created the world. Everybody agreed. We don't exactly know what God is. Some of us flatter ourselves we know 2% more than the others. Others say 2% of infinity is meaningless. All right. But generally, there wasn't such a thing as denominations, sects, and fractions of different groups. All the Jews were pretty doggone united. So that if I, a Jew from England, for example, in 1700, went on a business mission to Turkey or to Yemen or Persia, as happened, or if a Moroccan Jew showed up in London or in Vilna, it's all the same thing. I know the differences in the minhags and you sing the songs a little different. Big deal. So he sings L'chadadi this way, and that one sings L'chadadi this way. They're all singing L'chadadi. You understand? The benching is the benching, and believe me, Tisha B'Av around the world, no matter where you are, in that old world, is going to be pretty much the same. A few different kinas here, big deal. It's pretty much the same. Some people get up at 10 off the chair, some people 11. That's just the Jewish OCD stuff, but it's all the same. You see? Now wait a minute. Wait a second. That was the notice says this has been our strength because we're scattered around the world. We're in a hostile environment. Everybody hates us. Only thing holding us together, our own unity. Our own unity. And so he says we have monolithic unity, and in that lies our strength. He doesn't use my words, but that's what he's talking about. He's all around. Everybody agrees. Pretty basically the fundamentalism, to the nomism, and all the rest of it, but not after Shabtai. He says, starting here, and then moving to this, right? 1600s, 1700s, 1900s. But by that I mean, starting with Shabtai and Sabbatianism, you start to have more than one way of doing Judaism, and there's no way of bridging the gap. You can't make Sabbatianism into Judaism. You can only, one can surrender to the other, that's all. And they never did surrender to each other, just one petered out, the way we see different Jewish groups over the ages peter out. That's what happens. They intermarried, they this, that, the other, just disappeared. You follow? There's no way to, but from that time on, there's no one Judaism. By the time you get to the 18th century, so the crisis, instead from coming from the Sabbatianism, come from the Haskalah, from modernity, and all the rest of it, as we know, and then Judaism starts to have reform, conservative, secular, this, that, and the other, various ways of doing Judaism, and there's no way to put Humpty Dumpty back together again because they're coming from different starting points, and they'll never agree. It's just one will die out or one won't die out. And by the time you get to this, you're already talking about Jews who are alienated from Judaism itself, right? And how are you going to reconcile with a Trotsky? How are you going to bring Judaism and fundamentalism ever into any kind? It's not possible. You follow? It's not possible. And so, in the modern times, Judaism is unraveled. And it can lead even to the point they live in a world, anything is possible. You can be Hasidic and be friends with Ahmadinejad or Arafat, right? Ordinarily, you think it's not possible. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know. What does this reflect? It reflects the fact that the wheel is broken. And part of the modern Jewish condition is that the wheel is broken. And it's not a happy thing, but you have to look at the reality in the mirror. And especially for Tisha B'Av. This is in a couple days of Tisha B'Av. You talk about the base of being destroyed. That's true, of course. But the real problem as far as Tisha B'Av represents is that not only the base of being is destroyed, but the Jewish people, in a certain sense, destroyed. And when I'm talking about it took hundreds of years to play out, but starting in the 17th century, and with the Sabbatian and all the rest of it, we find a increasing Judaism in which it's fractionated and it's broken in such a way that it's very hard to reassemble. So we have a lot to pray for and a lot to fast for, and I hope everybody has an easy fast, and we're closing down the shop. Good night.